Hello, welcome to Books in the Biz, a podcast that looks at both the financial and operational sides of success. Please welcome our hosts, Dan Paulson and Richard Veltre. Dan is the CEO of Envision Development International, and he works with leaders to increase sales and profits through great cultures with solid operations. Rich is CEO of the Veltre Group and a financial strategist working with companies to manage their money more effectively. Now on to the podcast.
Hello and welcome to Books in the Biz. Rich, how are you doing this week?
I am cold.
Cold. At the time of this recording, I think we have both gotten a lot of ice.
Yeah.
Ice, baby. We should have had vanilla ice on.
Absolutely. No, ice is my nemesis at the moment. So yeah.
Not much different out here. Well, hey, the one thing I will say about elections and administration changes is it's always interesting. Some more interesting than others. And we've had a lot happen in the first couple weeks of the Trump presidency that's kind of given us a fair amount to talk about.
Yeah.
And there's one thing that I think may or may not apply to us at some point in the future is tariffs. So we recently had our illustrious president threaten tariffs to China, Mexico, and Canada. Mexico and Canada have managed to work their way out of the tariff issue short term, which we'll get more into. China, I believe, has not. I think they're still getting their 10% of their pound of flesh that they need to cough up. But this could impact businesses or it could not. And I thought it would be interesting from a financial perspective as well as a business perspective to talk about this, because even though some people have small businesses versus large businesses, this could still impact you pretty, in a pretty big way.
Sure. And I would say that from the finance side of it, so far everybody is not saying if, they're saying when. Anyone I've talked to has basically said everybody just has that expectation that the impact will automatically come from the fact that if these tariffs go into place, then there will be an effect. Not a question. That's basically it. It's not a question. It's just a statement that it's.
Well, right now, I think the great deal maker is using this as a bargaining chip. I honestly don't think he has any intent to put them into effect. And of course, unless somebody calls his bluff. There's a lot of people thinking that Canada was not going to do it and they were going to stick it out and allow the tariffs to go into effect. But Trudeau came in at the last minute, like literally the 11th hour, and worked out some concessions. It sounds like some of those concessions were already in place with the Biden administration. Of course, Trump and his team is taking their win there. It sounds like Mexico did offer a lot more than they were offering in the past. So in some ways, that's a good thing. But I really just see this as a bargaining tool. We are the 800-pound gorilla. We are the largest economy in the world, and we buy a lot of goods from other places as well as sell a lot of goods to other places. So when you look at it from a bargaining point of view and not an economic point of view, it's a big tool because and maybe you read up on this, but I think 40% or better of Canada's goods come from the U.S. So it's a pretty big chunk, and I would say Mexico is probably pretty consistent that way too. Of course, we do get a lot of other things from both those places that could impact us negatively, such as oil. A lot of goods. There's a lot of Mexican-built manufacturing facilities that ship goods across the border, so that could become an issue. But I guess, what are you seeing on your side of it?
Well,
from your perspective, not everyone else's. What do you think?
Okay, from my perspective, I think the tariffs, at the end of the day, I think there will be something put in place. I don't necessarily think to the extent that he's already announced this is what he wants to go after. I don't know that that's going to stay, but I think there will be something. And I think it's because, if you look at his history, this is how he gets people to the table. You push him and you push him hard, and then you come up with something that he really wants. Which, telling everybody I'm going to put a 25% tariff on it, that's a massive change, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if they balk at it, then he's gonna do it. I don't doubt the fact that he will actually follow through on what he said. There's definitely an impact. There's definitely a fact that people are gearing up for it. So anyone who imported from China up to this point has geared up and stockpiled their inventory, so they have excess, so that they don't have to make an order, right away and bring stuff in that's going to be subject to the tariff. And then the thing I saw this morning that was most interesting was, Ford stock dropped. And everybody's talking about Ford stock dropping because I think a bunch of their parts or a bunch of their vehicles are actually manufactured in Mexico. So somebody there, smarter people than me, are seeing that, Ford's going to be impacted. And people have already said the auto industry is where you're probably going to see a big hit. And another document that I saw in there related to that same article, it's not just the finished vehicle, it's actually parts. So there are some parts.
A lot of parts.
There was one, it was really interesting to look at. They were like, piston rods. The aluminum is basically polished and put together in Tennessee. Then it goes to Canada. Then it goes to Mexico.
And we wonder why our cars cost so much, right?
Yeah. And then it comes back into the U.S. and winds up in Detroit to be put into a finished vehicle. And you're basically sitting there, you're scratching your head. You're like, maybe there's an efficiency that can go on there. But
well, could you imagine if all those tariffs kicked in, though? You've got the piston rods that are going into Canada. So Canada already announced they would do retaliatory tariffs on us if we did it on them. So there would be 25% going in.
Yep.
There would be then 25%. Well, I guess if it goes from Canada to Mexico, it would skip over us. So there wouldn't be the markup there. But then it would get in Mexico, and then it would come back into the U.S. There would be another 25% markup.
Yep.
You're talking, it's not exactly 50% because it's 25% on top of the 25% plus whatever the initial cost was. That starts adding up pretty quick.
Yeah. I think they also estimated that the average cost of a vehicle would go up by, I think I saw the number of $3,000.
Wow.
Which, you start off thinking, well, that's a lot, but I started looking at it also, I'm like, recently all vehicles have gone up in price for a whole lot of other reasons than the tariff. So,
well, the average cost of a new vehicle now is about $45,000.
Yeah. So somewhere along the line, people are going to realize we don't have a market for this.
Mm-hmm.
So either the tariff is going to work to the point of people are going to buy vehicles that aren't, being put together by other people other than the U.S., or, they're just going to basically make a different choice, or they're not going to buy, which is going to force people to start thinking about, well, why aren't they buying? If they're not buying because of cost, how do I get the cost down? So it's a triggering effect, right? The tariff should have a triggering effect to kick in, I don't know, something, whether it's making the companies realize that, okay, we were making, a bigger profit before by having the prices up higher to cover our cost of getting stuff done outside the U.S. Maybe it really is just a made in the USA push like we had when we were kids.
Right. And yeah, I do think there's some of that. I mean, the reason for the tariffs is not what I would say technically an economic one. If we're sticking true to what is being told to us, the point of the tariffs is to help curb immigration and the fentanyl issues that have been plaguing us over probably the past 5 to 10 years, because a lot of that is coming across the border in various ways. Of course, we've seen the immigration situation over the last 4 years, and it's my understanding that this is being used as leverage to essentially shut that off. And I would have to agree with that because if you're going to hurt somebody, hurt them in their pocketbook. And if you're doing that with Canada and Mexico and it forces them to take action on it, then you did what you needed to do if they weren't doing anything before. And as we know, our president is a businessman by trade. He talks about the art of the deal. He is a wheeler dealer. So this is going to be the method he's going to use for it, where, maybe in the past it would have been more diplomatic approach to it. But I think also we've seen diplomatic approaches that haven't panned out that well the past couple of years. They've kind of been taking advantage of some of that.
This is true. Did I hear that the other reason that they're saying China was included in the Magic Three? China was included because they manufacture the chemical that allows
that is correct
the manufacture of fentanyl.
Yep, that is correct. Which kind of, in some ways, surprised me that it was only at 10% on China. I actually would have thought that might have been higher because of that issue, is where the raw chemicals from China are being refined, typically in Mexico more than Canada. But that is part of the reason for that, why China was included in that. I think there's other issues going on with China that are probably also going to be worked into this deal in the future. But
that's what I was thinking that as well. I don't necessarily think. I think fentanyl's like a very small percentage of the issue with China. when we've effectively over the past 30, 40 years, basically said, here, China, why don't you manufacture all this stuff from us, especially all the way down to medications.
Yes. I think we learned our lesson on that with COVID.
Yeah.
Everything was manufactured in China, and then of course COVID hit, and that shut down stuff for a while, and then you had the difficulty getting ships into port. So a lot of those goods and services we needed were sitting on a cargo ship just off the coast, waiting for their chance to get unloaded. But do you really want all your medication and all your pharmaceuticals to be overseas? It might be, again, cheaper to manufacture there, but now we run into a situation where much needed goods and services can't be accessed. And, this isn't really part of the subject, but it's kind of tied in. The China initiative, basically, where they're going into countries and say, hey, we'll redo your port. We will give you a fully modern port to bring in goods, and all you have to let us do is manage it. And I think some of that was tied into the kerfuffle over the Panama Canal, because they were working on an agreement with Panama to essentially help upgrade the canal and the facilities, and kind of the same thing. They were going to manage it. Well, once you give another country control of your port system, they can control what comes in, they can control what goes out, and you lose some of that sovereignty to it. So that's, while it doesn't tie to the taxes directly, I think that's another subject for another day, but this all leads to also increasing the cost of goods and services, mostly the goods that we get overseas. So from your perspective, if you were looking at this from a CFO side, you see all this stuff going on. I kind of know what things I would look at operationally, but what do you do from a financial end, especially for a small to medium-sized company that maybe doesn't have a gajillion dollars in funds to buy up all the goods that they need, ahead of time?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that. I'm like, buying all the stuff in advance and building up a warehouse full of stuff is okay if you, like you said, have the money to do that. I think the other problem is you really have to go almost product by product, especially, if you're doing multiple products or multiple lines, then you have to go through and figure out, well, what are your margins already? And it scares me a little bit because there's a lot of smaller companies that don't have the time or energy and haven't actually done it to go through and actually figure out what their margins are now.
Right.
What are they going to be after you have to pay a tariff? What's it going to be when you add that much cost? Did you actually just lose all your profit on that product? You really do have to take the time now and actually understand, am I going to lose out on this? Was I making enough before, but now I'm not? And therefore, does that have a much more radical change to what I have to do for my business going forward? Um, so I think that analysis is really the first thing that I would tell people you have to do. You have to make sure if you are getting something manufactured overseas, or north or south border, right, whichever
Yep.
border you're going across, you know does how much does this change your projections? How much does this change what you expect you're going to do between now and the end of 2025?
Yeah, I would say the other end of it too, from the operations side, I'm also looking at what other vendors can I get on my list to become potential suppliers. So you know where you're currently getting your goods and services from now. Are there some more localized ones? People
Yep.
in the US who manufacture those goods, because what you might find is those items might actually be about the same price, maybe even a little cheaper after these tariffs kick in.
Yep.
uh, that's something you got to be considering too. So even though you might be paying more, you probably really need to look at who you have as a backup, and that's really good to have anyway. I mean, to
Yep.
me, that's just sound systems management to have two or three suppliers around that you can, rotate in. It allows you to manage quality. So from a
Yep.
QA standpoint, you can test your other vendors' quality against different vendors just to make sure you're getting good quality. But it also provides you a situation where now if a vendor can't supply you with something, you can go somewhere else to get it. Where if you got to go through that procurement process at the last minute, anyone who's done that knows it isn't always easy or fun, and then you're beholden to whoever that supplier is because they know they have you over a barrel. So
Right.
now they can charge you whatever, otherwise you're shut down. I think the other thing that you should be doing, you probably agree with this too, is you probably need to start looking at your pricing structure and probably start factoring in some of those increases now. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that don't want to hear that, but you should probably start edging up your prices now just in case, because there's probably going to be a period of time where there's going to be a dip in, there's going to be an increase in cost and a dip in revenue. So you
Right.
might as well take advantage of that now and be prepared, and also normalize your customers that costs are potentially going up.
No, I totally agree with that. I think it's a matter of, I think there were a few people that were already talking about that. The fact that they've already, as you said, as I said before, the one company was definitely talking about how the fact of the tariffs has caused them to put more stockpile in. The next piece is, if you can adjust your pricing, I'd probably start to do it. And and also, when you figure that price increase in, try to be as conservative as you can in figuring out what your projected demand will be. So
Right.
if you're expecting a higher price, I wouldn't expect that all the same people are going to come in. I would have to lower how many people are going to buy because it is now a higher price.
Right.
So, think about it from that, supply and demand standpoint, you know, and understand that, you're going to have a drop, at least in some way. You're going to have a drop in who's going to come in and actually buy your product.
Yep. Exactly. Any other words of wisdom you would have for a company that's going to be dealing with this?
Um, I don't know that there's any other real words of wisdom on this one. I think, to a certain extent, I mean, don't think that it's going to be, world ending for the most part. I would think that there's a little bit more of just take it with some degree of reality.
Mm-hmm.
Expect that I believe this is going to happen. I understand that there is a need or a push for us to take everything back inside the United States, and boost our manufacturing capabilities and boost what we've been outsourcing in the past. I think that's somewhat of a new reality, and so there might be a little bit more cost involved, but I think for the long term it's not a bad thing. I think it's smart to expect that people are going to push for this after all the debacle, like you said, about COVID, et cetera, all the other outside factors of why I think that it's a good thing for the long term. Expect that it's going to be a slightly higher cost, and work it out so that you can actually afford it and move forward.
Yep. I think it'll actually, long term, I think it'll actually stabilize pricing, because if it's within the U.S., you have some controls over shipping costs, more so maybe than over port fees and over container fees and everything else like that. Plus, you don't have to worry about something gets stuck in customs or stuck on a cargo ship waiting to be unloaded and waiting for those. They might be key components that keep your processes going. Well, what happens if you have to wait a week or two to get those components in? Now you're back ordering items and you're delaying product, and there's holding costs to all that, where you've sold items and you can't get them off your shelf and get them into the hands of your customers. So I think overall it will help us long term, but like anything, any change like this, there's going to be some short term pain that comes with it. It's unfortunate, but that's kind of the way it is. I would also suggest that you keep an open line of communication with your customers. Be sure to talk to them and let them know what you're seeing, what you're experiencing, and how it's going to impact them. That also kind of helps to what point you were making, Rich, where you get a feel of, okay, does that mean now my clients are going to cut back on some of their orders? They might hold off on certain things until they realize, what's going to happen next. It helps you in that forecasting and that planning part. So that's another thing I would suggest is reach out to your customers, let them know what you're experiencing and what they can expect to happen. And it will be helpful to you and hopefully helpful to them as well.
I agree.
All right. Well, it's a short one, but there was a lot discussed there. And I think, again, it affects a lot of businesses, maybe more than they realize. I almost had a guest on from Canada today to talk about what he was going through, because he does have several product lines that come through the U.S. And, he was talking about the impact it was having on him. So the nice part is he's going to come back in March and he's going to share that with us. And that will be close to that 30-day window. So we'll be able to probably talk about this again on if something happened or if something didn't. But that's pretty much all I had today. Do you have anything else to add?
No, I think that's it.
That's awesome. Well, we'll let Bob take us out and we'll talk to you next week.
Want to
Sounds
boost your
good, Dan.
sales and profits, but need the talent to help you grow? XCXO is a one-of-a-kind platform to find skilled fractional executives to help develop your team into a high-performance powerhouse. Fractional leadership is a great choice when you consider the average executive-level candidate can cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars in salaries, benefits, and incentives. XCXO finds you the executive and utilizes their talents to build your team's experience, all for a fraction of the cost of a full-time C-suite leader. Contact XCXO today to fill the gaps in your leadership team. Visit xcxo.net to learn more.